Welcome to Life Stories Network, where every story holds a piece of our lives, and every moment brings us closer to what truly matters. Tonight, I want to share a story that may sound like it belongs to just one family, but I believe many of you will find your own reflection in it. It begins with a quiet evening, one of those nights when everything seems ordinary, yet fate has something waiting to unfold. It was late, the kind of late when the streets outside are empty, and even the hum of the city feels distant. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner, and I was ready to sink into the couch, turn off the lights, and let my tired body rest. My son, Daniel, was upstairs, probably scrolling on his phone like most teenagers do. My wife was reading in the bedroom. Everything was calm, steady, and familiar. But as I placed the last dish into the rack, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Daniel came down, looking hesitant. He didn't usually come to talk to me at this hour. I smiled, expecting he wanted a snack or maybe had a question about homework. But instead, he looked at me with a strange seriousness in his eyes. "Dad," he said softly, "can we talk for a minute?" I nodded, wiping my hands on the towel. "Of course, what's on your mind?" I asked, but inside, a quiet unease began to stir. It wasn't the words he chose, but the way his voice trembled, the way his eyes searched for courage. We sat on the couch, the room lit only by the lamp in the corner. I could feel the heaviness of the moment before he even spoke again. Finally, he whispered, "I think I messed up." Those words cut deeper than I expected. Parents know this feeling, the sudden rush of worry, fear, and the need to protect. I took a breath and steadied myself. "Tell me what happened," I urged. Daniel's hands fidgeted with the sleeve of his hoodie. He looked down at the carpet like it held all the answers he didn't want to say out loud. "It's about school," he admitted. "I've been lying about my grades." My heart sank, not because of the grades themselves, but because of the weight he carried before confessing. I leaned back, searching his face, trying to understand what he was truly afraid of. He explained that for months he had told us he was doing fine, that his grades were solid, but the truth was the opposite. He had been struggling, failing in subjects he never found easy. At first, he thought he could catch up. Then, when it became too much, he hid it, hoping it would all somehow fix itself. The lies piled up, and the guilt ate at him until he couldn't keep it in any longer. I listened quietly, not interrupting. My chest tightened with both sadness and relief. Sadness that he had felt alone in his struggle, relief that he finally opened up. When he finished, there was silence between us, the kind that feels heavy yet necessary. I reached out and placed my hand over his. "Daniel," I said softly, "thank you for telling me the truth." He blinked, surprised, maybe expecting anger or disappointment. I won't pretend I didn't feel both, but I knew this moment wasn't about punishment. It was about trust, about showing him that honesty, even when late, was still worth more than the lie. "We'll figure this out," I told him, together. His shoulders relaxed for the first time, and I saw the tension leave his face. "I was so scared you'd hate me," he admitted, voice cracking. "That broke me in a way nothing else could." I pulled him into a hug, something we hadn't done in too long. "You're my son." I whispered, "There is nothing in this world that could make me hate you." That night, the house felt different. The walls that usually echoed with silence now held a fragile truth, a bond tested and renewed. I realized how easy it is to assume our children know we love them, but how badly they sometimes need to hear it, to feel it, especially when they are at their lowest. Later, after Daniel went back upstairs, I sat in the dim light, reflecting on what had just happened. Parenting isn't about perfection. It's about being there, being present in the moments when your child's world feels like it's falling apart. I thought about my own father, about how many times I had hidden things from him out of fear, and how different things might have been if I had felt safe enough to confess. The next day, Daniel and I sat down with his schoolwork spread across the table. It wasn't easy. There were assignments missing, projects undone, and tests that showed how much he had slipped. But for the first time, we weren't working against each other. We were a team. Every question he asked, every frustrated sigh, felt like a step toward rebuilding, not just his grades, but our trust. I began to notice little changes in him, the way he stayed a bit longer at the table, trying to solve problems he used to avoid, the way he looked at me when he got something right, waiting for a nod or a word of encouragement. It wasn't about school anymore. It was about him realizing he wasn't alone, that he didn't have to hide his flaws. That week, I shared the truth with my wife. She cried, not because of the grades, but because Daniel had carried that burden for so long in silence. We both promised ourselves we'd pay closer attention, ask the questions that matter, and listen without judgment. Looking back, I don't see that night as a failure. I see it as the beginning of something stronger, a reminder that honesty is a bridge, and sometimes our children just need us to stand on the other side, waiting with open arms. Welcome back to Life Stories Network. If you've been listening closely, you already know that the heart of this story isn't about grades or school. It's about honesty, fear, and how a single conversation can shift the entire balance of a family. Tonight, I'll continue sharing what happened after Daniel confessed, because that moment was only the beginning. The real challenge came after, in the days and weeks that followed. The morning after Daniel opened up to me, I felt a new kind of weight on my shoulders. Not a burden, but a responsibility. I knew I had to guide him without crushing his spirit. I also knew that my own reaction would shape how he trusted me in the future. So, instead of lecturing him, I made him breakfast. Something simple, pancakes and eggs, but it was my way of saying, "You're safe. We're moving forward." When he came downstairs, his face still carried the worry from the night before. He sat quietly, poking at his food, and I realized the battle inside him hadn't disappeared. Trust doesn't rebuild in a single night. It takes time, patience, and proof. I looked at him and said, "Today, we'll sit together and make a plan. You won't have to face this alone." His eyes flickered with a mix of relief and doubt, but I could see he wanted to believe me. That afternoon, we pulled out his school portal, notebooks, and the stack of papers he'd avoided. The truth was harder than I expected. He wasn't just behind, he was drowning. Missing assignments, poor test scores, and low participation all pointed to a bigger issue. Daniel wasn't lazy, he was overwhelmed, and in that overwhelm he had chosen silence instead of asking for help. I remembered being his age, how every mistake felt like the end of the world, how even small failures seemed too big to admit. So I told him something I had never shared before. When I was your age, I failed my math class. I thought my parents would never forgive me, but what I learned is, failing didn't make me weak, hiding it did. He looked at me differently then, like for the first time he realized I wasn't untouchable. I was human too. Together we made a schedule, nothing perfect, nothing overwhelming, just one step at a time. An hour of study after school, a commitment to ask questions in class, and most importantly, a promise that if he struggled, he'd tell me before it snowballed. Daniel nodded, but I could see the fear of failure still clinging to him. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Even if you fail again, you're still my son. That never changes." Over the next week, I noticed how much effort it took him to rebuild his rhythm. He came home tired, but he sat at the table, working slowly through assignments. Sometimes he grew frustrated, snapping at the problems he couldn't solve. In those moments, I reminded him, it's not about being perfect, it's about showing up. His face softened each time, like he was slowly learning to give himself grace. Then came the harder part facing his teachers. Daniel had hidden his struggles not just from us, but from them too. I encouraged him to send emails and ask for meetings. The first time, he froze, staring at the blank screen, unsure how to admit his failures. I sat beside him and helped him type the first words. "I'm sorry for falling behind. I want to do better." His hands shook as he hit send, but when the replies came, something shifted. His teachers weren't angry. They were understanding, willing to help him make up work. One evening, after a long day, Daniel sat beside me on the couch. "Dad," he said quietly, "I didn't think they'd forgive me. I thought once I messed up, that was it." I looked at him, realizing how deep his fear of judgment ran. "People make mistakes, son. What matters is owning up to them. That's where respect is built." His head rested on my shoulder, a rare moment of closeness I hadn't felt since he was little. But growth isn't a straight line. A few days later, he slipped again, ignoring an assignment and trying to pretend it didn't exist. When I found out, I felt the anger rise inside me. For a moment, I almost yelled. Then I saw the shame already written on his face, and I stopped myself. Instead, I asked, "Why did you hide it?" His eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't want to disappoint you again." That hit harder than any failing grade. I realized then that this journey wasn't just about Daniel learning responsibility. It was about me learning how to balance discipline with love. Too much pressure, and he'd hide again. Too little, and he'd sink deeper. Parenting doesn't come with instructions, but it does come with moments that test your patience and reveal your heart. So instead of punishment, we talked. We sat together late into the night, discussing what disappointment really meant. I told him I wasn't disappointed in him as a person, only in the choices he made. And that distinction mattered. His shoulders eased, and I saw a flicker of determination in his eyes. He wanted to do better, not just for school, but for himself. As the weeks passed, I watched him slowly transform. He began to smile more, even laugh during study sessions. He celebrated small victories, like turning in an essay on time or finally understanding a tough problem. And every time I made sure to acknowledge his effort, not just the result. "I'm proud of you for trying," I'd say, and I meant it. One evening, as we packed up his books, Daniel looked at me and said, "Dad, do you think I'll ever catch up?" I thought about it carefully. Then I told him, "Catching up isn't the point. Growing is, and you're already doing that." He nodded, and for the first time, I saw genuine hope in his eyes. What struck me most wasn't his grades improving, though they did slowly. It was the way he began to carry himself, with more honesty, more courage, and a willingness to face challenges head on. And in that, I realized the truth. The confession he made that night wasn't just about school. It was about opening a door to trust, to growth, and to a deeper bond between father and son. I knew then that no matter how hard the road ahead, we had already won something more valuable than perfect grades. We had won back honesty, and once you have that, everything else becomes possible. Welcome to Life Stories Network once again. You've followed this journey from the moment Daniel confessed his secret to the steps he took toward rebuilding trust and responsibility. Tonight, we reach the final part of this story, and I'll tell you this, it's not a perfect ending, but it's real. Because family stories rarely tie up neatly, they grow, change, and live on in the small choices we make every day. Months passed since that night Daniel sat across from me and whispered, "I messed up." Those words had shaken our home, but they also became the seed of something new. Slowly, the tension that used to hang between us started to fade. We laughed more. We argued too, of course, but even the arguments felt different. Less about hiding, more about working through things honestly. By spring, Daniel's grades had improved, not perfect, but better. His teachers often said he was participating more, raising his hand when he didn't understand something. That wasn't just about schoolwork. It was about courage. For a kid who once thought failure meant silence, that was progress worth celebrating, and I made sure to celebrate it. Not with gifts or rewards, but with words, simple acknowledgments like, "I noticed how hard you worked today," or "I'm proud of how you didn't give up." Those words became the glue holding our trust together. One evening, after dinner, Daniel surprised me again. He pulled up a chair, sat across from me, and said, "Dad, can I tell you something?" His voice didn't shake this time, but it carried weight. My mind raced. Was this another confession, another hidden truth? I braced myself. He took a deep breath and said, "I want to do better, not just in school, but in life. I don't want to hide from problems anymore." I looked at him stunned. It wasn't what I expected, but it was more powerful than anything I could have hoped for. "That's a brave thing to say," I told him, "and I believe you will." His eyes met mine, steady and clear, and I saw the boy I had raised turning into a young man before me. But life has its way of testing us, even when we think we're on solid ground. Just a few weeks later, Daniel faced another challenge. He had worked hard on a science project, one he poured his heart into, only to receive a lower grade than he expected. I found him in his room angry, his project shoved into the corner. "What's the point of trying if it never works out?" He snapped when I asked what was wrong. In that moment, I realized the journey wasn't over. Growth doesn't erase frustration. It teaches you how to face it differently. I sat beside him and said, Sometimes you can do everything right and still not get the result you want. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're learning resilience. He didn't answer right away, but I could see him listening, even if he pretended not to. The next day, he picked up the project again, looked over the teacher's notes, and made corrections. He didn't ask me for help this time. He chose to push through on his own. Watching him reminded me that part of parenting is learning to step back, to let your child stumble and rise without always reaching for their hand. As summer approached, Daniel and I shared more conversations than we had in years. We talked about his dreams, his fears, even about mistakes I had made when I was younger. He seemed hungry for the truth, not just his own, but mine too, and I gave it to him. I told him about the times I had lied to avoid disappointment, the times I thought I wasn't good enough, and how I eventually learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's strength. One night, sitting under the stars in our backyard, Daniel turned to me and said, "Dad, do you think I'm a disappointment?" That question cut deeper than I can explain. I turned to him, held his gaze, and said, "You could fail every class, you could fall 100 times, and you would still never be a disappointment. You are my son. My love for you isn't based on what you achieve, it's based on who you are." His eyes watered, and he nodded slowly. That moment, I believe, changed something inside him permanently. By the time the new school year began, Daniel wasn't just keeping up with his work. He was thriving, not perfect, but present, engaged, and more confident than before. The lies were gone, the secrecy was gone. In its place was an honesty that made our home lighter, freer, more connected. Looking back now, I realize that his confession that night was never about grades. It was about trust. It was about fear and courage, about the human need to be accepted even when we're at our weakest. Daniel taught me as much as I taught him. He reminded me that parenting isn't about controlling your child's path. It's about walking beside them through the shadows and into the light. So, if you're listening to this and you're a parent, I want you to take this with you. Your child doesn't need you to be perfect. They need you to be present. They need to know that your love isn't conditional, that it doesn't rise and fall with their report card, but that it stands firm no matter what storm comes. And if you're listening as a son or daughter, I want you to know something too. Your parents may not always say it the right way, but most of the time, their love for you runs deeper than you can imagine. Don't let fear keep you silent. Speak your truth. You may be surprised by the arms that are waiting to hold you. That night when Daniel first said, "I messed up," I thought it was the start of a problem, but in reality, it was the start of a new chapter in our lives. A chapter built on honesty, resilience, and a bond that no grade, no mistake could ever break. And as I tell you this story now, I hope you remember it the next time you're afraid to tell the truth, or the next time someone you love comes to you with trembling hands and a heavy heart. Listen, hold them close, and remind them they are never alone, because in the end, life's greatest lessons don't come from perfection. They come from the moments we dare to be real, and that's the kind of story worth remembering.